I've been in lots and lots of presentations, and you likely have too, with a big hockey stick graph. And they talk about something called exponential change. And what they're talking about is the fact that the pace of change over the past 50 to 100 years has moved at a rate that is unprecedented. Because we saw for thousands and thousands of years a linear curve happening nice and slow. And then suddenly, around the time of the first industrial revolution, we started to move a little faster, and then a little faster, and then a little faster. And in the last 20 years, we have hit that inflection point, and the hockey stick is in full effect. We are moving very rapidly up that vertical curve. And this is making so many of us feel overwhelmed, especially when we look at the pace of change around technology, AI, even how we know what's true. We're all feeling a little bit out of our element and overwhelmed. And that's why I started Sense-Making Conversations as an experiment. I wanted to bring together the brightest minds, people I work with every day, futurists, thinkers, scientists, innovators, and actually make sense of this very moment that we're in and give us a view, a perspective on the moments that might or could or will come next. Not just analyze what's happening, but find the hope that lives inside of it. So today, this is our 20th episode, and I thought it might be a good time to pause and reflect. We're coming to the end of this year, and this will be the final episode in this season. And I wanted to look at what's been shared and notice what patterns are emerging across all of these different perspectives. And welcome. I'm your host, Andrea Sampson. So as I sat down and did a deep dive into every episode, I noticed that in every one of those conversations, whether they were about AI or climate or neuroscience or even the future of work, they all kept bumping into the same tension. And that tells us that something is important, something that we need to pay attention to. And the tension that I saw was this. Technology is growing exponentially. It's doubling its capabilities in shorter and shorter time spans, but the way that our brain processes the information, the way our communities make decisions, and the way that our institutions build trust, well, these human systems, they haven't fundamentally changed in generations. And it's that mismatch that's creating a gap between technology and the very systems that manage us as humans. For example, someone can generate a convincing video of anyone saying anything at any time, but our brains are still operating under the illusion that seeing is believing. Communities are seeing data center proposals that are going to affect power grids and water supplies. And meanwhile, the way in which they make decisions, the town halls that they go to, they run in the same ways that they did in the 1950s. And workplaces, they're asking their employees to use AI to do the same tasks that these very employees were trained to do themselves. What do you think that's doing to the very people who are using those systems? And in this gap between our human systems and technology, how can we stay connected to our own sense of agency as humans? To move from feeling like passengers to feeling like active participants who are, in fact, working towards something more hopeful. And this is where I turn to the wisdom that my guests have so generously been sharing. These are people who are actively shaping the changes in our world today. And when I look across their different approaches, whether it's Farah Nasser, who's rebuilding trust in journalism, to Arash, who wants to redesign our entire energy systems, or to Dr. Ann Kahn, who's helping us to understand that our stressed out brains need something different than what we're giving them. I notice a theme in the core capabilities that we as humans need to strengthen. And it's not the skills that got us to this point in history, things like memorization or compliance or accepting information at face value. But these skills involve new civic muscles that let us engage with complexity, verify what's real, and ultimately maintain our judgment. These are specific things that we can each do that shift you from being a passive recipient of change to being an active participant in shaping it. And yes, every one of us has that capability. Because when we bring our attention to and engage these civic muscles, it allows us to exercise the agency we need to co create a future we're actually excited to live in. So, let me share 3 core practices that I've synthesized by looking across all of these conversations, listening to these incredible experts, sharing their wisdom, and providing us with a blueprint for how to regain our agency and create a future that we actually want. Let's start with the first civic muscle, which is all about verification. How do we decide what to trust in a world where anyone can make something look real? In one of our recent episodes, I spoke with Farah Nasser, who spent decades in broadcast journalism rising to the top of her game. And she walked out on that career to be able to tell the truth. And something Farah told me really stuck with me. She said there's an AI company, she didn't name which one, that had a CEO that called an all hands meeting. Now picture yourself in that room. You're good at your job, you've been there a while, and your boss stands up and says straight out, in 2 years, AI is going to do your current job. That's the reality. I'm not going to lie to you. Can you imagine? This could have sent people into panic mode. Many were probably in their mind already updating their resumes and having breakdowns in the bathroom. But here's what Farah said. It actually had the opposite effect. The team became more engaged, more trusting. Why? Well, because the CEO was doing something rare in corporate culture. He was treating people like adults. And those are Farah's words. And it goes even deeper than that, because by being transparent about what was coming, he gave his team something precious. He gave them both the time and the agency to take control of their future. They could start upskilling if they wanted to, not the moment that they got their notice. They could be involved in reshaping what the roles would become instead of just waiting and reacting when the truth was too loud to ignore. The transparency from the CEO was experienced as an act of respect for every person gathered in that room that day. It doesn't mean it didn't create fear, but what it did was it allowed them to be in control of where they wanted to be in the future. And all too often, that's exactly what is denied so many people. So, how does this tie into verification? Well, here's the pattern that I'm starting to see. That CEO modeled something that we all need to practice. He showed his sources. He said, here's what I know about AI's trajectory. He showed his reasoning. Here's why I believe this is the timeline. And crucially, he acknowledged uncertainty. We don't know exactly how this is going to unfold, but here's what we can see coming. Those 3 statements, he knew the trajectory, he knew the timeline, and we don't know exactly what's coming, allowed for everyone to believe him. He didn't just make claims that were unfounded. He showed his sources. And this connects to something that Tiffany Vora taught me about how we navigate information today in another episode. Tiffany's a scientist and a futurist and a digital biologist, and she uses the phrase, trust but verify. And this is a phrase that I hadn't heard so much until my conversation. And interestingly, since that conversation, I hear it over and over and over again because it does come from the scientific world. But in reality, it's become an essential process for every one of us. Trust, but verify. Let me give you a personal example of why this matters. A while back, I was scrolling through my feed and I came across this article that just was perfect. Everything about it aligned with what I believe about the future of work. The design looked professional. The statistics seemed really solid, and the argument was compelling. So I hit share. I sent it out to my network. And I had shares and likes and people commenting almost immediately. And then I got a private message from someone I respect. You might want to double check that source. My stomach dropped. Because when I actually looked up the organization and tried to verify the statistics in the article, the whole thing fell apart. It was completely fabricated. And I had just amplified to thousands of people something that was untrue. I was mortified. But now, looking back, I'm grateful for that experience because it changed how I operate. Now, before I share anything, I run it through what's become my quick fact check. First, I ask myself, what's the source? And I investigate it. I make sure I'm clicking on those links and I'm looking at them and going, is this just some online publication or is this verifiable? Who's saying this? And why are they saying it now? And what angle might they have? Then the second is what's the method? Was this just them making it up or did they have some form of quantifiable research? Or was there something that underpinned the claim that they're making? In other words, how did they reach that conclusion? Can I see their thought process? Or are they just making general statements that have no basis in reality? And finally, what uncertainties are there? Are they admitting that there are things they don't know? And when I share it, am I doing the same practice? Am I identifying what I don't know? Because honestly, anyone who claims absolute certainty about anything these days, well, that should be your first warning. In my conversation with Tiffany, she gave me an even simpler test for this. When someone seems absolutely certain about something, especially something complex or future facing, ask them, what could I say that would change your mind? That's a really powerful question, isn't it? Right away, it stops us from owning a side of an argument and allows us to examine it through a lens of curiosity. Are you so fixed in your opinion that you would never change your mind? Or are there some factors that would need to be in place in order for you to consider something different? And when we ask that question, listen to the answer that's given. Because if they say nothing, there's no evidence at all that would shift my view, then you're not dealing with someone's knowledge. You're dealing with their beliefs and their emotions. And well, that's fine. We all have beliefs, but we should know the difference between the two. Because if we're putting something out there based on our own beliefs, that's a very different thing than putting something out there as a truth. And when we are able to see the difference between those two things, we can make a better decision as to what we share. And this brings me to something else Tiffany explained that I think is really important. There's a distinction between facts and truth. A fact is something verifiable. As an example, I can say that it's 20 degrees Celsius in this room. That's measurable. But truth, on the other hand, well, that's open to interpretation because one person might say, my God, it's incredibly hot in here. And another person could say, are you crazy? It's freezing. And both are experiencing their truths, but the facts don't change. The room is still 20 degrees. So a fact and a truth are two very different things. And when we learn how to tell the difference between those two things, it will make an incredible difference in the way in which we consume information and data. We get in trouble when we mistake our own interpretations for universal fact. It's the difference between saying, it is warm, and saying, it feels warm to me. It is saying it's a fact. It feels is a belief. That distinction might seem small, but in our current information environment, it's everything. This adds nuance and allows us to engage in the practice of verification, even in very small moments. Looking back on my conversation with Farah, she put this really practically. She says, in this era, when you're listening to anyone, a politician, an influencer, even a friend sharing health advice, you have to, as she put it, be a journalist on that person. And what she meant was look into their background. What qualifies them to speak on this? What are their incentives? Who funds them? What do they gain if you believe them? She said we all need to be, and I love how she phrased this, a lot more sophisticated and educated on what we are consuming. And truly, it's not paranoid or cynical. It's about being an engaged citizen as information becomes easier and easier to share. Because when we all practice verification, when we make our checks visible, when we say, here's how I know this, instead of just trust me, we are able to feel more steady, more hopeful that we're building the foundations of a shared truth. And that's the first civic muscle that we need to create. And like any muscle, it gets stronger with practice. And this one needs a lot of practice in our world today, where misinformation is thrown around far too easily. The second civic muscle is all about participation. And I want us to really consider what participation really means and how it can impact the future we're building. Are we truly allowing ourselves to engage with massive changes happening in our communities, especially technological changes, as partners rather than victims? Do we have to sit by passively, or can we be active co-creators of the future that we want? Let me tell you about something that completely shifted my perspective on the power of collective participation. In my episode with Anne Connolly, who works in blockchain and Web3, she told me about a phenomena called the Constitution DAO, D-A-O. And if you're thinking, I have absolutely no idea what that means, bear with me because it's fascinating and it's an incredible example on human behavior. So here's what happened. In late 2001, one of the original copies of the US Constitution was going up for auction. And a group of people online decided, wouldn't it be amazing if ordinary citizens could collectively own this founding document? Not a sole wealthy collector or a corporation, but just everyday people like you and me. Now, normally, organizing thousands of people into a pool of money would take months and months and months of meetings and bureaucracy and all kinds of difficulties. But using blockchain, they were able to coordinate an unbelievable achievement in only 48 hours. 17,000 people who had never met each other were able to pool together $43 million in 2 days. 17,000 strangers amassed $43 million. And that's the power of technology. It wasn't about legal structures or bank accounts or committees. It was about the action of participation. Now, unfortunately, they didn't win the auction. Someone else outbid them. But what Anne showed us, and what she called it, was a wake-up call for the traditionally trusted institutions. Passionate people, when given the right tools, can mobilize resources and coordinate action at a scale and speed that was previously impossible. And this story demonstrates a shift in how we can engage with power and institutions. In the past, there might have been protesters holding signs outside the auction or a letter writing campaign. But the tools that are becoming available to us now are tools that allow us to actively build alternatives. Instead of just naysaying how the current system works, we can create our own approach in a matter of days, and in some cases, hours. I spoke with Arash Azami in another episode. He works in energy systems, and his philosophy works so well to this point of participation. He quoted Buckminster Fuller, saying, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. You build a new model that makes that existing model obsolete." He shared something personal that really landed with me. He said, "I have a daily energy budget, just like everyone. Either I spend it moaning about what's wrong with the world, or I spend it building something that may or may not work, but something I believe in, something that brings me joy." Think about that for a moment. Every complaint we make, every moment we spend in outrage, that's energy we could be using to build alternatives. In my episode with John Mitchell, president and CEO of the Global Electronics Association, he used another example showing the power of participation. John told me about communities that are dealing with data centers being built in their neighborhoods. Now, data centers are these massive buildings full of servers that power our digital world. They give us our Netflix and our Instagram and even our AI tools. And they all run within these large facilities. And traditionally, when a data center comes to town, the community's response is pretty binary. Either protest, the not in my backyard, or resignation, there's nothing we can do about it. But John described communities that are taking a third, more proactive approach. They're saying, okay, you can build the infrastructure, we get it, but let's talk about what our communities get in return. When we think about these data centers, what's often brought to the front of any conversation is the fact that they generate massive amounts of heat. And that heat is actually a waste product. It just gets vented out into the atmosphere, and it actually hurts the atmosphere. It starts to warm things up. But some communities are starting to understand that it could actually be put to good use. And they're starting to negotiate deals where that heat gets piped into warm public buildings, community centers, or even community pools. These facilities often have huge battery backups that store cheap electricity, and communities are negotiating to tap into these batteries during peak pricing hours, reducing local energy costs. As John put it, perspective plays a huge role here. It's a shift from seeing those companies as being the enemy to being a good friend who's integrated into the community and helping out where they can. And here's the key. It's not on just the facility to be the one starting this. Communities have to ask for the help they need. They have to feel involved and believe that it's possible. Because if they don't believe it's possible, those conversations can't even be started. And they have to be willing to ask and discuss the issues that they're facing before the permits are approved and before any building is done. That's when they have the most leverage. So communities have to come together with this type of knowledge. That's just one example. There's so many more as our world shifts and changes, because the way in which we are operating now is not the way we've been operating for the last millennia. So we have to look at everything differently. And this is actively participating, using our civic muscle, not fighting against change, but shaping and influencing how change happens. Not saying no, but also not saying yes. In fact, taking a cue from the improv world and saying yes and, because that's where the conversation begins. When we can yes and something, we find possibilities where before we only saw roadblocks. In one of my other episodes with Ozioma Iguanawanu, who works in strategic foresight, she frames this beautifully in her conversation. What she says is that we need dreamers, but more importantly, we need dreamers that do. Not just imagining better futures, but actively building them. She reminds us that we have agency, that we can, as she put it, question more, imagine more, dream more, and take actions, no matter how small. Because when we do this, we are, in fact, advancing the vision of the future that we want. We are taking action on that future. The civic muscle is about imagining ourselves as builders, co-creators, and active participants. It's about seeing every change that comes to our communities, every new technology, every new development, and even every disruption as an opportunity to shape outcomes rather than just be the recipient of them. Now, this brings me to my third civic muscle and the third theme that I saw across the 20 episodes of Sense Making Conversations. And this third civic muscle is all about discernment. And for me, this was one that really hit close to home because discernment, I think, is the thing that we use the least but need to focus on the most. It's personal for me because it's about maintaining our judgment in an age when machines can do so much of our thinking for us. And of course, with the proliferation of AI, it's one of the most important skills we can bring to the table. It's something I regularly navigate in my own work. I use AI all the time. I have it as a note taker in every one of my meetings. For over 4 years, it has transcribed every word that I say, and it pulls out action items and summarizes decisions and helps me to remember to do the things I'm supposed to do. And I appreciate the efficiency of this tool. But the biggest benefit is that it allows me to actually look at people's faces during meetings. It allows me to notice when somebody's body language doesn't match their words. I can be fully present because I'm not frantically trying to take notes, so I'll remember everything that's happened. The AI is handling all of those tasks that would normally dominate my brain. It frees me up to step into what I do best, and that's understand. The promise of these AI tools is that when we use them well, they become partners for us. Partners in helping us to remember, partners in catching words that we might not have heard, and partners that can actually help us form our thoughts later on. And I like to describe the AIs that I use the most as my thought partners because they are something that thinks with me, not for me. In our episode with neuroscientist Misha Byrne, he raised an interesting point that really stuck with me. He said, our brains need friction to develop. When everything is smooth, when AI removes all the struggle, we stop developing judgment. Think about it like this. You know those nutrition labels on food packaging? They're incredibly helpful for making informed choices. But if you only ever relied on those labels, if you never developed your own ability to recognize what makes food nourishing or questionable, your sense of discernment would atrophy. You'd lose the capacity to evaluate things where there is no label to guide you. You'd pick up a banana and wonder, is this good for me? The muscle of discernment grows through practice, through encountering information, weighing evidence, noticing contradictions, and learning to distinguish what's reliable from what's not. When we outsource our evaluative thinking, we lose that vital ability to judge for ourselves. Misha's point was that the same thing is happening with our cognitive abilities. If AI is always giving us an acceptable answer, we're less likely to push back and ask for more, let alone the answer that isn't what we expect. If it always writes a decent first draft, We weaken our ability to make critical changes to the document, not because AI is bad, but because our reasoning muscle gets weak from lack of use. Dr. Ann Kahn, another neuroscientist, gave us a practice that seems almost too simple, but that has genuinely changed my routine. She said, make a human being the first thing you touch in the morning, not a device. If you live with someone, that might mean a hug before you reach for your phone. If you live alone, it might mean calling a friend before checking email, or even just putting your hand on your own heart and asking yourself how you're feeling before you ask the internet what's happening. Anne explained that when we start our day in reaction mode, immediately responding to notifications, news, and other people's urgencies, our frontal lobe, that part of our brain that does all the complex reasoning, literally has reduced function. We operate from our stress response rather than our thinking brain. Something she said made me pause. She said, when we are in constant reaction mode, we can't think critically. It's not that we won't, it's that we literally can't. The stress hormones that are flooding our system prevent the kind of deep thinking we need for good judgment. And this challenge of maintaining our reasoning becomes urgent, especially when we look at how AI is transforming work itself. For many of us, it's the elephant in the room. What about our jobs, as AI can now write, analyze, create, and solve problems? Mark Patterson addressed this during our conversation. He said, pick it up and start playing with it. Use AI, experiment with it. But this is the critical point. Do it with intention. He explained that the old model of proving your value through outputs is dead. If your value was writing 10 reports a week, AI can do that. And it can do it before lunch on Monday. If it was analyzing spreadsheets, it doesn't need coffee breaks. AI just puts out the analysis. So what's the new model? Well, it's actually what I like to call show your thinking. It's demonstrating and tracking your ability to discern, reason, and judge the results. It's the difference between using AI, as I like to say, a mirror versus a mind. And what I mean by that is that AI has access to all of what we already know. And it's really good at going in and finding that. And in fact, if like me, you've been recording all of your conversations and all of your meetings, it's got an entire database of me, and it can be a mirror for me. But it can't be my mind. It can only regurgitate what I've told it. I get to be the mind that then allows it to do more, to think better, because I can ask good questions. I always like to say, answers are easy. It's questions that are hard. Let's say you're going to use AI to help with a project proposal. One way would be to prompt the AI to get the output, maybe tweak it a bit, and then submit it. Done. You probably got a subpar submission. Another way to do it, and a way that exercises that civic muscle of discernment, looks quite different. Yes, you prompt the AI, but you also document what prompts you tried and why. You note what the AI suggested and what you rejected, and you explain your reasoning. You show where you disagreed with its recommendation and how you improved them. You make your thinking visible. You see, using AI as a thought partner is about getting responses, digging deeper, understanding why the AI is making the decisions that it's making and giving you the information that it's giving, and then moving through it with new questions that get you to the place you actually want to be. Another method that John Mitchell and I spoke about, and I absolutely love this, is what he called creating a living room of experts. You can essentially have a brainstorm session with Einstein's body of work, create a debate with an entire room full of historical figures, and pressure test your ideas against different philosophies. Now, you're still the one asking the questions, and you're still the one wondering, what if? And you're still the one providing the ethical framework, the context, and the judgment about what's worth pursuing. So it's your discernment, your ability to prompt, your ability to ask good questions. That is the key. Because what you're doing is you're tapping into that large language model, that database of historical knowledge from each one of those historical figures, and getting access to how they would approach what you're asking it. This is the difference between a mirror and a mind. They are the mirror, you're the mind. The companies that understand this are already changing how they hire. They're less interested in your portfolio of outputs and more interested in your process. They ask in interviews, can you explain your reasoning? Can you show your judgment? Can you demonstrate that you're using AI as a thought partner rather than a thought replacement? For those of you with kids entering the workforce, or if you're shifting careers yourself, this is the skill to develop. Not just using AI as a tool, but using it while demonstrating your own cognitive strength. Continue to use AI to eliminate pointless friction, the memorization and the repetitive tasks, the grunt work, but keep the generative friction, the wrestling with ideas, the sitting with uncertainty, and the effort of creation. Because while AI is getting better at providing answers, it doesn't have instinct. It can't feel when something is a little bit off, but you can. And if you exercise your ability to articulate your feedback and insights, you are strengthening and protecting a skill that is uniquely human. So let me bring this all together for you. We've talked about 3 civic muscles, and here's how you actually start using them. First, verify. Before you hit share on that article, before you accept something as true, take 10 seconds. Ask yourself 3 things. Who's saying this? How did they come to that conclusion? And what are they admitting they don't know? And when you do share something, try this. Actually tell people how you verified it. Say, I checked this against, or I confirmed this through. And make sure that that checking is visible. The second civic muscle is participation. This is a big shift. When something's changing in your community, whether it's a new development or a new technology coming in, you don't have to choose between resistance or acceptance. Instead, you can shape it. Ask what the community gets back. Get those promises in writing while you still have leverage. And remember what Arash said. Sometimes it's better to build the alternative than fight the existing system. And third, discernment. This is about protecting your ability to think clearly. Try this tomorrow morning. Touch a human before you touch a device, even if it's just putting your hand on your own heart. And when you're working with AI, don't just save the final outputs. Save your process. What prompts did you try? What did you reject and why? That's where your value lives, in the judgment, not just in the output. These can start as small practices, but like building any muscle, they will get stronger every time you use them. And when we go back to that hockey stick graph, that exponential curve that we're currently living in, we're not leaving human adaptation behind because the gap isn't insurmountable. We just need to shift our focus into new skills that offer us agency in this time of massive change. Through the lens of agency and civic involvement, the future isn't something that happens to us. It's something we practice into being. The civic muscles we build today determine the society we become tomorrow. If you've discovered your own practices for building these civic muscles, or if you've identified maybe other muscles we need to strengthen that I haven't touched on, I'd love to hear about them. Please leave a comment and share what you've learned. We make even more sense of the world when we all contribute to the insights. And before I go, I just want to let you know how much of a privilege it has been to talk to some incredible thought leaders on this journey with you. This is going to be our last episode of 2025, and we're busy booking guests for our 2026 season. If you know of anyone who should be on Sense Making Conversations, having a conversation with me, please send me a note. Drop me a direct message. I would love to hear from you. We'll be taking a short break to reflect on everything we've learned together this year, and we'll see you back here in January with new conversations and new insights that will help us all get through 2026 even more successfully. For now, keep practicing those civic muscles. Keep verifying, keep participating, keep discerning, and most importantly, use your agency to create a future we can all feel a little more hopeful about. I'm Andrea Sampson, and this has been Sense Making Conversations. Until next time.